Welcome all into another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer. That's Thomas Dunn. It is the off season. The season is officially over as we had the championship game just the other night. Michigan walking away with the national championship, and that the Final Four was just amazing. Like all three games, obviously like Michigan running away from Arizona like they did. I don't think we quite saw that happening, but then we saw Michigan just pound every single team they ran up against this year. And so congrats to the Michigan Wolverines for winning the championship. To Justin Joyner, who's on their staff, obviously a former St. Mary's associate head coach. So congrats to him, who's also, of course, now the new head coach at Oregon State. So congrats to him. And that's going to be a really interesting kind of look at Oregon State, but of course they're going over to the Pac-12. So we won't talk a ton about Oregon State too much moving forward here. But there was a lot happening over championship weekend in Indianapolis. And one of the big notes that came out, of course, was that Mark Few was named to the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. And we can go over the laundry list of accolades for Mark Few. But this is not obviously the first time he's been nominated, not the first time he had been up for this honor, and it finally came through. And again, a name that's going to live in the history books in WCC basketball forever, in West Coast basketball forever, and now all of college basketball, because it's hard to tell the story of, like, especially like the NCAA tournament without mentioning the name Mark Few, because of they essentially defined what Cinderella turned into. And of course, Gonzaga, no longer a Cinderella, just the kind of like the one of one story that the Zags have turned into over the last 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, there is no West Coast basketball really without the presence of Mark Few, and it's cool to see him kind of get that recognition while still being an active coach, by the way. I think that's kind of like, not that it's, I guess, not customary, but it's still kind of somewhat of a rare feat when you see a coach that is still going, still trying to give his best, still going on deep runs in the tournament, and getting put in the Hall of Fame at the same time. So all the due respect to Mark Few and what he's done, because that body of work and that history is no joke whatsoever. He's been at his best for quite some time, and even beyond the result that you mentioned in the Final Four, I think it was probably cool for him to see Tommy Lloyd, take on the big stage based on his history with the Zags and the WCC, and be a good sounding board, if nothing else, despite the result. I can't say I saw Michigan running away from Arizona like that after the Cats team I saw in San Jose, but that's sometimes how it goes. And they picked a bad time for a bad game, but I'm sure Mark Few and Tommy Lloyd will talk it through. And you mentioned the connections all and around with the WCC and eventually now the Pac-12. But all things considered, it was cool to see Mark Few get that honor. I think you knew it was going to happen at some point, just because based on what he's given to this game and a lot of the people that he's impacted and even brought back. You think to Zach Norvell Jr. based on what he was given in a uniform and now as a coach on the sidelines. I think it's just a cool feat to acknowledge, even though as the Zags are going on their way out. I mean, this is WCC really history being reflected on the big stage.
Yeah, and I know, like, the few naysayers that there will be about Mark Few and his success, about like the fact that he hasn't won a championship. The fact that, like, you see coaches across the sport, not only in the college ranks but the professional ranks, have so much respect for him speaks to how good he actually is. Again, like, this was someone who was an assistant on the Olympic team and has a gold medal through that squad. Like, that's how much respect that Mark Few has in the sport as a whole. The fact that he was able to go work with the NBA guys in the Olympics just a couple summers ago says so much about his impact on the sport. Because again, like, you look at Zag teams, you look at the success that those, especially over the last, like, say 10 or so years, that Zag players have had in the league, they are pumping out NBA players left and right. And obviously, like, we can kind of go to, like, say the Chet Holmgrens, the Andrew Nemhards, you go to the Drew Timme, who's kind of been up and down, Kelly Olynyk, Adam Morrison. Like, again, like, the laundry list kind of continues of guys that they produce for the NBA, Rui Hachimura. And again, when you see Zags in the NBA and how well they're doing, that is a total reflection on how well they were coached before they ever got to the league at Gonzaga in Spokane.
Yeah, I think you mentioned like some of the players there. I mean, you go even further down the line, Corey Kispert, kind of the dead eye shooter he was. Jalen Suggs, albeit being a one and done, having a lot of his moments in the same vein. You mentioned kind of the tenureship of Drew Timmy and beyond. I think there's so many different guys who played so many different roles. I think that's kind of what sticks out to Montes Sabonis. I mean, he's in there. Zach Collins is in there. I mean, we can go on and on and on. We can be two of those guys who just name random dudes and random players for hours. And I think you can kind of go into each story for the Zags in the NBA, and that ultimately being a reflection of what Mark Few and a lot of the assistants. I mean, that's Tommy Lloyd gets some of that credit. Brian Michelson gets a lot of that credit. Go on down the line. There are lots of different guys who made their mark on it, and it's been Mark Few kind of steering the ship for quite some time. And being a, I want to like being a presence where he doesn't necessarily have to put himself out there and announce, "Hey, this is who I am," but you kind of get to notice it through his work over the years. And I think it's a cool thing to kind of reflect on, even as he's still going and trying to make more history.
Absolutely. And as we're starting to talk about successive players in the league, we're going to transition here to talk about, well, the portal has opened, but that also does mean we're going to see some declarations for the NBA draft. And we have had the first of the WCC names to pop up for declaration of their intention to go to the NBA, and that is Alan Graves from Santa Clara. This isn't a huge surprise. I think to a lot of people that his name had been moving up draft boards left and right throughout the course of the regular season. And of course, his performance in the NCAA tournament, I don't think hurt his case at all. So seeing his name, no surprise. There was no note or anything about him signing an agent or what his like intentions, like if he is just going to go to the camp, see what happens. So it seems a little open-ended on whether or not he could actually return to Santa Clara if he doesn't what kind of get all the feedback he'd want. But exciting news to see again another Santa Clara player declare for the NBA draft.
I mean, the potential to have 3 first-round picks in 5 years, I mean, Jesus. You look at that, I mean, that wipes the floor with just about everybody on the West Coast, and I think it does because Broncos, I think, were just one of like 5 or 6 teams that had 2 first-round picks and back-to-back drafts with when it was J-Dub and Pods. And, there hasn't been too many drafts since then, obviously. So for Alan Graves to kind of potentially etch his name in there, that'll be awesome to see. I'm really intrigued to see how he develops and see if he goes to like the NBA Combine. There are always the yearly camps like Santa Barbara in the Chicago area too. So kind of take a look at kind of what happens and where he's going to go, some of the feedback he gets. Some people will look at the 11 points a game and be like, "Well, how can you average 11 points in the WCC and be a first round pick?" To which we got to say, all you got to do is watch the games. I mean, this man has such a high IQ. He's so tough. He great hands, good positioning, and awesome fundamentals. And I'll always think back to the bits where I'm getting texts during Santa Clara games of, some things could be going awry, but then Alan Graves steps in and, for lack of a better phrase, they tell me Alan Graves is saving our lives. And Alan Graves did so for quite some time this season, was an awesome representative for Santa Clara. And especially in that second half of the game against Kentucky. I mean, he has a shot that technically should be living forever in Santa Clara history. But, things happen, obviously, as they do in this game. But all things considered, it was awesome to watch him. We'll see how the draft process plays out. But if this is the 1 year that we get of Alan Graves, he rocked. He was an absolute rock star on that basketball court. And, selfishly, hopefully the Denver Nuggets call his name on draft night.
I mean, you mentioned all the things. I mean, Alan Graves really was like such the difference maker for this Santa Clara team. And the fact that this was a guy coming off the bench for this team obviously says kind of a lot about the depth of this Santa Clara team, but then also just kind of like to an extent, the humility that Graves was able to kind of handle in coming off the bench. Again, like he was still playing like significant minutes in even though he was coming off the bench, and his role just continued to grow and grow as the season went along. And again, like he brings that back to the basket game. He can still pull you outside and take that three. He's a good enough ball handler right now. It's obviously he will need to get better at as well. 3-point shot will need to get better, but as he goes into the NBA, but there's so much potential for him. looking at this team. And again, like Santa Clara is just, they're pumping out NBA players, which I think says a lot to obviously the development staff, the coaching staff, the recruitment that Santa Clara's has been able to have over the last like half decade. It says a lot about also now the reputation that Santa Clara is going to carry, that, yeah, I can go to Santa Clara and become an NBA player. Or like if I'm like not quite on that cusp as a like a power forward or whatever else, I can still go there and make my mark and get to the places that I want to go. We saw that with Jalen Williams. We saw that with Brandon Pajemski. We now have seen it with Alan Graves. And again, like it's not just them, because obviously like even like a Keyshawn Justice was amongst those guys who also ended up with that chance as well, to be able to get to the NBA and be in the G League and whatnot. So it's not just like the draft pick guys, but also a number of players who have come through Santa Clara who've also gotten that opportunity and worked their way into at least G League spots, and not at least getting a cup of coffee in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, look, you mentioned that, and in the same vein, I can turn it towards Adama Balls with the Grizzlies right now. 2 straight
Yeah.
10-day contracts to end the season. I mean, you think of the guy who showed up on campus after kind of not having many minutes at Arizona. It's like, who are you going to be? And he's someone who kind of rose up and did his time, and even through some of his own struggles, worked through it, got to the G League, and now getting some of these NBA minutes, has scored double-digit points in some of these games. So a massive credit to Adama Ball in doing so and trying to make his own mark in the NBA. You mentioned Keyshawn Justice, and that's a very valid representation. Johnny O'Neal's in the G League, so many different guys and so many different people on the coaching staff that deserve a lot of credit, including Herb Sendek, Jason Ludwig, Ryan Madry, go on down the line. So many different guys who have made their imprint with these guys, and turning it back to Alan Graves. I mean, you meant like down the stretch of the season, like you could pencil in Alan Graves for like 2 to 3 3-pointers a game, especially as a stretch big. He plays at his own pace, which I think is, he never really felt sped up. He just kind of worked. Probably the one thing that the NBA teams are probably going to be looking for is can he bulk up and face up against these like threes and fours? Can he find a way, maybe have a quicker first step or something like that? But when you look at everything else like in the toolbox, like there's so much to like, and there's so much that can be tapped into more than anything. So I look at Alan Graves' prospects, and I think they're looking good. So I'm not planning on him returning as a Bronco, but hey, you never know. But I do wish him all the best in this NBA draft process, and hope it works out for him, because he was a dude this year.
Yeah. A lot of intangibles that I think coaches are going to like about Alan Graves. Does a lot of the little things well, and the fact that he can score is obviously the huge added bonus to everything else that he's able to bring on a night in, night out basis. But as you mentioned, the guys who are returning, well, the guys who are exiting, because the portal officially did open this week. So all of those intents that we saw last week, those become official. We saw a report from Matt Norlander from CBS. Over 1,500 names have been entered into the portal across the sport. So that roughly is like we're about 45% of all rosters have hit the portal. So if you're feeling a little bad about your team basically having nobody left or one guy left, well, guess what? You're not alone, because it is happening to everyone. And obviously some teams in the WCC are rebuilding a little bit more than others. We know St. Mary's is basically kind of starting from scratch. We know LMU is kind of basically starting from scratch. And we haven't quite seen all the names, but I'd imagine Pepperdine is going to be starting from scratch as well. San Diego kind of similarly. So it's not unusual. This is kind of the norm. If your team hasn't gone through this to this point, feel lucky, because you've kind of been avoiding it to this point. And we did see another few names get added to the list. As we were talking about Santa Clara, Sash Gavalugov was added to that list over the weekend. We saw Cameron Williams from Portland get added to the list. Justin Rochelin from Pacific also added to the list. So again, we have some more names that are starting to filter in, and the portal remains open until the 21st. So there is a couple week window here where names can continue to be added, but after the 21st, that's when at least the window to enter the portal will close. And after that, we'll see the scrambling to fill the rosters from across the country.
We'll see where the dust settles. And you mentioned some of the names, maybe include like Ryan Beasley, also in the portal from USF, as they kind of reset themselves. Even though they're departing the league, Emmanuel Innocente, like that's a given what he had done with the Zags. I think at minimum would have been at least a 6 man area, sixth, seventh man coming off the bench next year. Obviously, provided really good defense and was improving it from a two-way perspective. So, really hard to, you know, digest what that looks like for lack of a better phrase. But all things considered, it's a lot of reset time for a lot of folks. Some more necessary than others, and it was really intriguing to see how other teams, like you mentioned, Pepperdine, LMU, St. Mary's for that matter, how you kind of tend to try and forge your new identity given their different contexts.
The one thing I will say, like, I mean, the Inocente one is interesting because again, the Zags going to the Pac-12, and you looked at who all they have coming in. Maybe there wasn't the spot; he wasn't going to be the starter going into next year, and maybe he's looking for that. I wouldn't be upset to see Emmanuel Inocente end up with someone in the WCC if that is what works itself out. Because you're right, like you mentioned how much he was improving on the offensive end at toward the end of the season, because we always knew the defense was there, but finally the offense started to kind of come through later on in the season. The 3-point shot was there a little bit more. So obviously the consistency still needed to pop up, but uh, bit a potential to actually kind of stick around in the WCC would be an Emmanuel Innocente type player.
Yeah, I mean his archetype is going to be so wanted by a lot of teams, and even to the power level. But it depends how much his offense is going to join the party. I think that's his big question. You kind of know the tenacity he'll bring on defense more than most, and especially the tandem. Excuse me, as you go like next to Jalen Morley this past season, there was a lot of good, and for my money, should have been WCC Defensive Player of the Year. I think that was a miss by the coaches. At least one of them two should have been it. But I think when you look at the power level, how much can he continue to improve that shot? And I think his list of suitors is something that I think is kind of a high variance outcome, if you will, because there's not necessarily a whole lot of reads on where Emmanuel and Chente might go.
And a couple more names actually. It was kind of like, again, there's been so many names it's kind of hard to keep up at times. A couple from Seattle that are John Christophilus and Huron Dan are both hit the portal too. So Seattle U started. Oh, and Austin Maurer. So a few from Seattle U also added to that list as well. Now, one team that obviously has had its own dealings with the portal already, but has already announced a good number of returners that kind of is putting together a solid group is Portland. The Pilots have already announced that a few names that will be returning this coming season. Amongst those are Timo George, James O'Donnell, who we mentioned last time, Dante Sensori Hercules, Riley Parker, who missed most of this season with an injury. That was when I saw those names start to roll out. I'm like, I kind of like this solid group of returners for Portland going into next year. Again, a lot of times we talked about how if Portland had just stayed healthy for the most part of this year, they would have been a bigger factor than they ended up being. And Timo George was in the midst of that. Year two of Dante Sensori Hercules is going to be a big part. James O'Donnell, another year development there. It's a solid group. I'm not mad at this group for Portland that we're going to see going into next year.
I'm not either. And you look at kind of even further into that skeleton, Riley Parker, obviously him facing his own battles this season. I think that could be a piece where you're like, that you didn't get to tap into it really at all this year. So can he find a way to continue to, rebound it? And there's still the graduate transfer part of the portal that's already off and moving. Pilots already having signed a grad transfer Hunter Adam after Davidson, and you look at his shooting splits. Okay, now like you add that to Ashante Leggett's offense, and it's never the Pilots under him, and really dating back to his time at Eastern Washington, they've never been longing for offense. So I think there's a lot of skeleton pieces, especially considering the instability of other programs, where you can say Portland has a chance, I think, to graduate into that next year. Obviously, not having Joel Foxwell changes some of that calculus, but I think all things considered, in the grand scheme of things, this is not a bad place to be whatsoever. If you're Portland, there are far worse places to be in far more dire situations, even across this league, that I think that the Pilots are avoiding for the most part, at least at this moment.
Right. Like again, like you look at who like the list of names who are coming back. We know that the young Foxwell is also on his way to the Rose City as well. So there's some pieces here. And the Pilots, I think one of the challenges of obviously that they've had over the last couple of years was retaining some of their better players. And they were able to retain a fair number of them so far in this offseason. And go and thinking about this squad, thinking about the players that come back, it's a good mix. Obviously, they still need to fill some holes. This is still a team that's going to lack in some size, so they need to figure that part out. They need to figure whether or not the newest of the Foxwell family is going to be able to kind of hit the ground running and be that guy right away. I think they still need to figure out the defensive end as well a little bit more. But the bones are here, I think, for Portland. And I think it's at least a good starting point when you think about that. Still have the rest of the offseason to kind of rebuild the rest of the roster. But it's good. Again, it's always good to have as much continuity as you possibly can, especially when it's bringing back 3 or 4 rotation players from that group.
Yeah, I co-sign the continuity, and especially how much it escapes this day and age of college athletics, and even across the board, even at the power level. And you're seeing some of these teams where even like the skeleton of like Kansas, for example, with Badunga entering the portal, they're a big man. Like you ask yourself, why are they leaving? Like you're in such a good situation. The big man, I believe, Cheryl from Alabama. Like why is he leaving? He's in a good spot. So given all of that, and given how much I just referenced and what we referenced about all the people leaving from other teams across this conference, I think Portland's in a spot to where they can. I don't. They shouldn't be content whatsoever, but they can say, okay, we're I think a leg up when we hit the ground running for summer workouts and eventually into fall practice more than anything. Because I mean, there's so many times where you're like, where is the chemistry going to come from? How's this team going to come together? And I think Shante Leggins and company have less questions for that compared to recent memory. But I think that also raises it does raise and it should raise the expectations for a Portland team that does need to graduate into that next tier of competing in the WCC.
Well, now there's a couple of NCAA notes that we want to also kind of dive into. Actually, one that was related to the portal, which I forgot to actually mention, was news about some of the eligibility rules, or at least there's exploration of the eligibility rules. So I'm just going to read the tweet here. The NCAA is exploring a significant change to its eligibility rule per Yahoo Sports' Ross Dellinger. Next week, an NCAA committee will discuss a new age-based standard for athletic eligibility that would grant athletes 5 full years of eligibility from the time of their 19th birthday or their high school graduation. No waiver requests, red shirts, or exceptions will be permitted, except for a small group of outliers, those on maternity leave, military service, or religious missions. And obviously, with like so much of the chaos that there has been with eligibility, the portal, NIL, all of it, this one seems at least like it's a good starting point to think about, hey, because we've talked about like 26, 27-year-olds still playing college basketball. This will at least kind of put the cap on the age component. Obviously, there's still NIL components you have to deal with, transfer portal components you have to deal with. But on an eligibility front, this at least kind of sets the rule of like, hey, the college should last you 4 to 5 years. Here is your cap at 5 years. You get the one, whether it be redshirt, injury, whatever, to play with. But after 5, the proposal here, or at least the idea that's being explored, is that would be it.
Yeah, and I hear it, and I like the idea in practice. I just think the one area of I don't know if you call it concern, but just like an observation at this point is, to people who have multiple injuries. Like, I mean, you look at Tylen Grant Foster's situation. I think that's a prime dealing. Imagine trying to fit his journey into 5 years and given all the context of what happened, what he did go through in terms of starting, stopping, starting, stopping, and trying to finish out his college career. You can be on whatever side of the dial that you want to be on in terms of the argument itself. But from the perspective from this new proposal, well, that doesn't happen anymore. Like it's gone. Like that, and think of you apply that to some of the other teams and some of your own players. You're like, oh man, this guy's been off and on injured. I think of Kevin Gadd at St. Mary's. He's been in and out with injuries to a certain respect, and it's like, okay, do you want to have his career, I guess, not necessarily be ended for him, so to speak, but if he goes down, it's like, okay, that's it. Like there's no recourse, there's no medical red shirt. So I'm intrigued to see kind of what the split is and what happens and how people kind of break down and try and criticize it to ultimately try and make the best proposal possible. I like the 5 years to play, especially when it comes to general red shirting and general gray shirting. I think the injury component of it is something where I think it might need a little bit more exploration just because of how nip and tuck and how fickle the game can be. I mean, Dwayne Newberry coming back and basically losing this year because of what happened last year, I think also stands out kind of within that time frame. So I look at all that. I like the idea in practice. I do think there needs to be a little bit more digging into what you think about with a medical injury and especially how that would take place with like medical red shirt and stuff like that.
Yeah, and obviously there's going to be a lot of conversation and investigation with the NCAA because again, probably one thing that they're thinking about through this entire process, how can we not end up in a courtroom when it comes to this? How do we avoid having this become a legal issue again, which I'm sure it's going to become one either way. It's whether or not the NCAA can actually win a case for once when it comes to eligibility. And obviously this rule is they're going to discuss, and I would hope that they will try to figure out a way that kind of at least limits the opportunity for those scenarios to happen. Because and I don't think it's again like it's not that so many of us are against the idea of having these stories be things because like the Tyon Grant Foster story, as you use as that as the example, it's like his story to overcome everything that he did on a medical front is amazing, and that is something that should be kind of talked about and again and showcased, like especially at the college level. At the same time, you there has been definitely some like skirting of the rules, and I think one of the things the NCAA kind of put themselves in the deep hole on was the waiver process. The fact that like from one case to the next, it's like, oh, well, this one gets a waiver, but this one doesn't. The fact that there was not this kind of hard line in the sand on this is the eligibility and that's it was the problem. And that's where they got themselves into trouble. So this might address some of that. We'll see. Again, the NCAA will be discussing it next week, and we'll hear more about what's going to be moving forward on this front. Now, something the NCAA did decide on, or at least the report that is going to happen, is the scenario none of us actually wanted as fans, and that is the expansion of the NCAA tournament to 76 teams. This we unfortunately, as much as we didn't want it to happen, money talks. We knew this was going to happen, and I know that there are some who are still trying to be the positive note on this, that this means that, oh, this means more mid majors will be able to get into the NCAA tournament. This is where I am the total cynic because I don't believe that for a second. This is just a way to get 8 more power conference teams, 6 of which probably don't belong there at all, into the tournament. And it's as much as like, yes, more basketball is not necessarily a bad thing, but when you see some of the teams that have been involved in the bubble the last couple years of like maybe teams 69 through 76 aren't tournament worthy anyway.
Well, why? Look, apply that to this year. We would have had Auburn in the NCAA tournament. No, no, no. All right. We had Oklahoma in there. No. All right. This was unfortunately what feels like an inevitable decision that people were going to make. And look, I can only, cross my head in shame so many times. But, think of how good you had it. The NCAA tournament 68 in its purest form, and acknowledging that even that was an expansion from years prior. But this was as good as it got. You make a 68 team field in the at large, you feel good about yourself, and you should. Now it's like you're handing out some participation trophies. Like you got teams that will not belong in this dance, that will look horrible in this dance, and they will not be getting asked, "May I have this dance?" going forward. So I think that's kind of what it's shameful, to be quite honest with you. And but unfortunately, not surprising. NCAA barking up the wrong tree, and the basketball committee, as usual. I hope some sense comes back in terms of getting this back to something that will benefit the student athletes, something that will benefit the fans more than anything, because even fans know when their team doesn't look the part, and it's like, this is over. Like, this is not what we need to be doing right now. You see with the commitments to the Crown and the NIT. Now you get some of those teams that try potentially being in March Madness. Doesn't sit right with me. Doesn't sit right with many. I mean, you look at John Rothstein's stampede and campaign against expansion. Unfortunately, it seems like it's going to go down in vain. But maybe there's some phone calls we can make to some people and plead, don't do it. Don't do it for all that is holy and everything else that's wrong in the NCAA. The NCAA tournament in March Madness is right, and there's nothing that needs to be done to change it.
And if this tournament wasn't any indication of that, I don't know what was, because we got some really good games in this NCAA tournament. I mean, a lot of times, like I think about that. Oh, by weekend two, kind of like tune out a little bit because it gets a little on the chalky side. But the games all the way through were top notch this year, and I think that's one of the things. I'm like, you had 68, and it worked. It worked to perfection, and expanding it just waters it down. You end up with a few teams that maybe that shouldn't be in there to begin with. And like, I mean, there's been some ugliness over the last like handful of years in those first four matchups. And I can't not think about some of those of like, hey, those were the next teams in. Like, so you want to add 6 more of those teams? I don't, or 8 more of those teams. I'm not buying it to expand it because of what we've seen in recent memory in those first 4 games. And of course, like the teams that we do see that get left out, and it's kind of like, good. They should have actually been left out of the tournament.
Less is more. I mean, you think back to the North Carolina controversy a year ago, then they beat up San Diego State. You think of the way the Mountain West kind of got shut out a little bit this year from March Madness. Like, so many of these teams have chances to control their destiny, and they just don't do it. So there's no need to have them out there when they've already had one, potentially more, potentially multiple chances to right the wrongs and find a way to get themselves into a high leverage situation to earn the right to go to the NCAA tournament. And when they don't do it, there's no reason to extend another olive branch and runway and say, "Yep, here you go. Let's go. Let's go have a dandy. Let's go have a date where you had to basically pay your way in or something like that." So, not happy. I'm just not happy about it. And if this is indeed the last 68 team tournament, at least I can take solace that my team made it ethically to the bitter end, and same with yours. So that we will take solace with as we head to the bank, and especially as things potentially change down the road.
All right, we will now get down off the soapboxes on the 76 team and wrap this one up. As we are week 1 in the portal, obviously a couple more weeks to go. We'll be starting to round through everything else the next few weeks as far as like the changes, everything else. We'll try to get some people on, everything else. Anything to wrap it up for this episode?
I'm really excited to see what these new coaches in the league look at from the transfer portal perspective, from McConnell to Aldrich to Blount. Like, there's so much in terms of what they say, but I think what you say versus what you do and who you get, I think it's an exciting mystery more than anything. I don't say that from the perspective of we don't believe what they're saying in terms of exploring their vision, but I think when you start to see the tweaks, especially from Mickey McConnell's side compared to Randy Bennett, how does he like to fine tune what his roster and what his program would look like? How does J.R. Blount try and import Iowa State culture and principles into San Diego? And how does Griff Aldridge try and recoup in building a winner, kind of like how he did at Longwood? So the very much of the mind of these new coaches. They don't know what they don't know, but it's really going to be really cool to find out.
All right. Well, that'll wrap it up for us. So be sure to hit subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you listen to the podcast. Follow on social media at unofficial WCC pod. That's Thomas. I'm Zach. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will catch you later.